So today, I want to take a look at the second of the three poisons that the Buddha said plague us as human beings. The first was greed, which I spoke about 2 weeks ago. And the third is ignorance, which I'll speak about in 2 weeks. But today we're going to look at the second of the three poisons, anger, which is also sometimes translated as hatred. One of the earliest Buddhist texts written in the Pali language is called the Dhammapada, which means the path of the Dharma. And it's really a collection of sayings allegedly spoken by the Buddha and gathered from his direct disciples who wanted to preserve what they'd heard from the Buddha himself. One of the few sacred scriptures that do that, really. Jesus never wrote anything, and the scriptures that were written many years later, we're not sure if they're accurate or not, but this is one of the earliest from the Buddhist tradition. And the first chapter in the Dhammapada is called Twin Verses because there are sets of couplets, pairs of possibilities for us to consider to help guide our conduct. So I want to read just a few of them that's at the beginning of that chapter that relate to the second of these three poisons, anger, that each of us deal with. Our life is shaped by our mind. We become what we think. Suffering follows an evil thought as the wheels of a cart follow the oxen that draw it. And here's the couplet with this. Our life is shaped by our mind. We become what we think. Joy follows a pure thought like a shadow that never leaves. She was angry with me. She attacked me. He defeated me. He robbed me. Those who dwell on such thoughts will never be free from anger or hatred, as it's sometimes translated. She was angry with me. She attacked me. He defeated me. He robbed me. Those who do not dwell on such thoughts will surely become free from anger or hatred. For hatred or anger can never put an end to hatred or anger. Only love alone can. This is an unalterable law. People forget that their lives will end soon. For those who remember, quarrels come to an end. In a nutshell, if you know some of you remember the poet and writer, the satirist Dorothy Parker, and she once said, hatred is filling, but it isn't nourishing. Same with anger. Now, it's true that there's a difference between hatred and anger in that hatred usually involves hating everything about a person or a group of people, whereas anger involves being, angry at something someone or a group of people has done to us. We've all had experiences where we're angry at someone, but when pressed about it, we admit that we don't hate the person, right? We all get angry at people. We don't hate the person. We may not like them very much at the moment. We may not even like them ever again. But hatred is visceral, and it often involves aggression and cruelty, or even violence. And perhaps you've felt that at some time where such hatred has been directed at you. But whether we use the word hatred or anger, it's still what the Buddha called a poison. And it's intimately connected with both greed and ignorance. You remember what I said about the three poisons the last time I spoke, that they're depicted in Tibetan Buddhist iconography at the center of the wheel of life, called the Bhava Chakra, which is a visual representation of the sorrows of that wheel of samsara. And they're right on the hub in that iconography, right? Greed is depicted as a rooster, and hatred as a snake, and ignorance as a pig. And what's more important is that they literally feed off one another. They're each grabbing each other's tail in this vicious cycle that they have. And so that centrality of those three poisons demonstrates their role in that powering that, making that wheel of birth and death and rebirth, as the Buddhists believe, and an escape from nirvana impossible. To nirvana, rather. I think most of us can relate to anger on an almost daily level. Usually it's fleeting, right? Maybe you spill your coffee, all right, or your tea all over you, and you get one of those, annoying spam phone calls. All right, those are really annoying. We get angry at those. Or maybe it happens and it stays with you for a little while, and then eventually it fades away and you forget about it. Let me tell you another Buddhist tale about anger. This one is a modern Buddhist story. In fact, it's only a few weeks old. Once, there was a man who shall remain nameless, who lived in a small town in a garden apartment complex with his lovely and talented wife, his handsome young son, and their old cat who liked to order them about. They lived a relatively quiet and peaceful life. Now, the man had heard long ago the teachings of the Buddha and tried to live by them as best he could. He reminded himself each morning of the Four Noble Truths, the Noble Eightfold Path, the 5 remembrances, and the 3 poisons of greed, anger, and ignorance that the Buddha warned about. But very soon after reminding himself each morning, he quickly forgot them and didn't always put them into practice. In fact, he sometimes acted very badly. He often chided himself, saying, "I'm a really bad Buddhist." On one of those days, a Monday morning during autumn, the landscaping company sent its men, as it did every week, to trim the bushes and the lawn and to blow the leaves at the garden apartments. It was always a very noisy affair, and it really annoyed the man. Why do they have to do this so early in the morning? It's only 8 o'clock, and it's autumn anyway. The grass and the bushes aren't growing that fast anymore, and they should let all the leaves fall and then collect them all at once. On this particular Monday, after the landscapers had trimmed the bushes and the lawn and blown the leaves away, the man went out to his car, which was parked in the driveway right next to his apartment door, only to find the entire passenger side of his car covered in dirt and bits of broken leaves. The landscapers had blown all the leaves in the direction of his car instead of facing away from it and then into the driveway, where they gathered it up in a big vacuum truck. And they left without even trying to clean it. Now the man was very angry. He cursed and he yelled and he swore to call the landscaping company and the garden apartment complex management and to say something to the landscapers, which really meant to yell at them, on the following Monday when they arrived. The man needed to use his car, so he drove to the car wash in town, but they were closed. So he drove to the other car wash on the other side of town, but they were closed too. So he drove to a car wash 8 miles away, only to find out that they were closed too. Mondays. I hate Mondays, the man thought to himself. Why do car washes have to be closed on Mondays? Don't people have dirty cars on Mondays? In an even worse mood now, the man went home, parked his car next to his apartment door in the driveway, and sat fuming on his sofa. Then he turned on the weather and got even more angry because the weather person said that a big storm was coming and there would be rain and possible local flooding. Great, he groused to himself, another storm and flooding. I hate rain. What a terrible day this is. Then he sat down at his desk in a grumpy mood to write a sermon for the next Sunday because, besides being a Buddhist, and not such a good one at that, he was also a Unitarian Universalist minister to a very wonderful community of other Unitarian Universalists, and he was going to begin a sermon series about the 3 poisons of greed, anger, and ignorance. Very soon, the rain began to come down heavily as he watched dolefully through the window next to his office. Ugh, rain. I hate rain, he muttered to himself. Later, after dinner, he watched some television and complained to his lovely, talented, and very patient wife about the news, about the new host of Jeopardy, and other things that annoyed him, and then went to bed. By the time he woke up, during the night, the rain became even more intense and woke him up a few times. Perfect, he thought. I'm going to be exhausted in the morning. By the time he woke up, the rain had stopped, the sun was shining, and the air smelled fresh. The man reminded himself of the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Noble Path, the Five Remembrances, and the three poisons of greed, anger, and ignorance that the Buddha warned about. Walking out of the door of his apartment into the sunshine, he breathed in the fresh air, looked around as, a perfect autumn day. Then he looked at his car and saw that the rain had washed away all the dirt and bits of leaves that had been left on it by the landscapers. Wonderful, the man said with a smile. What a great job the rain did of cleaning off the dirt on my car. Now I don't have to go to the car wash at all. You know, next week, I'm just going to ask the landscapers if they can blow the dirt in a different direction. Or maybe I can just move the car to a different spot when they get here. No point in getting angry. Remember what the Buddha taught about anger. I don't want to be one of those people who complain about everything. Then he got in his car, drove out of the driveway, and stopped behind a line of cars waiting for a train to pass, and said to himself, oh, great, a train. I hate trains. Why do they always have to pass whenever I'm driving? And traffic is going to be horrible. I hate traffic. Ugh. Yes, he was a very bad Buddhist. Now that person may seem very familiar to you, but perhaps you can identify with that kind of anger, the kind that just grabs you like Velcro. Let me read you what the Tibetan Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron writes about this. She says, someone criticizes you. They criticize your work or your appearance or your child. At moments like that, what is it you feel? It has a familiar taste in your mouth. It has a familiar smell. Once you begin to notice it, you feel like this experience has been happening forever. The Tibetan word for this is Shenpa. It's usually translated attachment, but a more descriptive translation might be hooked. When Shenpa hooks us, we're likely to get stuck. We could call Shenpa that sticky feeling. It's an everyday experience. Even a spot on your new sweater can take you there. At the subtlest level, we feel a tightening, a tensing, a sense of closing down. Then we feel a sense of withdrawing and not wanting to be where we are. That's the hooked quality. That tight feeling has the power to hook us into self-denigration, blame, anger, jealousy, and other emotions which lead to words and actions that end up poisoning us. She says, remember the fairy tale in which toads hop out of the princess's mouth whenever she starts to say mean words? That's how being hooked can feel. Yet we don't stop. We can't stop because we're in the habit of associating whatever we're doing with relief from our own discomfort. This is the Shenpa Syndrome. The word attachment doesn't quite translate what's happening. It's a quality of experience that's not easy to describe, but which everyone knows well. Shenpa is usually involuntary, and it gets right to the root of why we suffer. So as Pema Chodron says, we become attached to that feeling of anger that someone or something has caused us. Has anyone ever hurt you so much that you were left with resentment that stayed with you for years? I suspect that many of us have experienced situations that have lingered in the form of resentment long after the events took place. I remember my father especially used to say, you don't hold a grudge holds you. All of us have had experiences in life that have broken us. Times when the words and the actions of others made us feel bad about ourselves. Sometimes our brokenness comes from our families, when we hurt each other by not loving each other well. But the thoughtless and selfish way, or by the thoughtless and selfish ways that people act in families when our families have broken apart through divorce or abuse. And all of these experiences leave us with scars. And they sometimes leave us with scars that leave us feeling less than whole, feeling not okay about who we are, or fearful of being in a relationship. The author Elizabeth Lesser writes about being broken open in many ways in her book, Broken Open. She says this, Over and over, we are broken on the shore of life. Our stubborn egos are knocked around, and our frightened hearts are broken open, not once and not in predictable patterns, but in surprising ways. And for as long as we live, the promise of being broken and the possibility of being opened are written into the contract of human life. Anger is often mingled with that brokenness that she writes about, right? It is, isn't it? Perhaps it's caused by someone or some group in your family. Maybe parents or siblings or relatives. Speaking from personal experience, I know what that's like. And if you know that, then you can understand when I say that it can take years to move through that anger and brokenness, perhaps a lifetime. Or maybe it's caused by your religious tradition that you grew up in, or some organization you belong to. Because just like family, as I've so often said, beloved community, the community we all say that we're trying to create, can be very messy. It's not perfect, because none of us are perfect. And we will be hurt by members of any community to which we belong at some point. And we will get angry, and yes, we will, without fail, hurt others in our community or our family or wherever, and others will get angry with us. The Zen Buddhist master Thich Nhat Hanh says this about anger. He says, when we get angry, we suffer. If you really understand that, you also will be able to understand that when the other person is angry, it means that she is suffering or he is suffering. When someone insults you or behaves violently towards you, you have to be intelligent enough to see that the person suffers from his or her own violence and anger. But we tend to forget. We think that we are the only one that suffers and that the other person is our oppressor. This is enough to make anger arise and to strengthen our desire to punish. We want to punish the other person because we suffer. Then we have anger in us. We have violence in us, just as they do. When we see that our suffering and anger are no different from their suffering and anger, we will behave more compassionately. So understanding the other is understanding yourself. And understanding yourself is understanding the other person. Everything must begin with you, he says. So what's the answer to the predicament of anger that we all suffer from? Buddhism teaches that patience and forgiveness are. And again, let me quote what Pema Chodron has to say about this. The Buddhist teachings tell us that patience is the antidote to anger and aggression. When we feel aggression in all its many forms, resentment, bitterness, being very critical, complaining, and so forth, we can apply the different practices we've been given and all the good advice we've heard and given to other people. But those don't often seem to help us. Let me read that last part again. We can apply the different practices we've been given and all the good advice we've heard and given to other people. But those often don't seem to help us. I know that. It's said that patience, he says, or she says rather, it's said that patience is a way to de-escalate aggression. I'm thinking here of aggression as synonymous with pain. When we're feeling aggressive, and in some sense this would apply to any strong feeling, there's an enormous pregnant quality that pulls us in the direction of wanting to get some resolution. It hurts so much to feel the aggression that we want it to be resolved. So what do we usually do, she asks? She says, we do exactly what is going to escalate the aggression and suffering. We strike out, we hit back. Something hurts our feelings, and you find yourself in the middle of a hot, noisy, pulsating, wanting to just get even with someone's state of mind. It has a very hard quality to it. With your words and your actions, in order to escape the pain of aggression, you create more aggression and pain. At that point, she says, patience means getting smart. You stop and wait. You also have to shut up, because if you say anything, it's going to come out aggressive, even if you say, I love you. Patience has a lot to do with getting smart at that point and just waiting, not speaking or doing anything. On the other hand, it also means being completely and totally honest with yourself about the fact that you're furious. You're not suppressing anything. Patience has nothing to do with suppression. In fact, it has everything to do with a gentle, honest relationship with yourself. Patience has a quality of enormous honesty in it, but it also has a quality of not escalating things, allowing a lot of space for the other person to speak, for the other person to express themselves while you don't react, even though inside you're reacting. You let the words go and just be there. This, she says, suggests the fearlessness that goes with patience. If you practice the kind of patience that leads to the de-escalation of aggression and the cessation of suffering, you will be cultivating enormous courage. You will really get to know anger and how it breeds violent words and actions. And then there's forgiveness, I think, which I think it's harder than patience. The Buddha said, holding on to your anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You're the one that's getting burned. Forgiveness also doesn't mean forgetting what has happened, right? We have to be real about that. We do remember those big hurts that have happened. We carry them in our hearts. But rather, forgiveness is about letting go of the power that a grudge has over us. And this allows us to move and become better selves. And equally important, forgiveness is not the same thing as reconciliation. The Reverend Bruce Bodie writes this. He says, the distinction is this: forgiveness opens the possibility of reconciliation with another, but it does not necessarily lead to reconciliation. One can forgive and not reconcile. This is because reconciliation demands something from the other side, whereas forgiveness has to do with an internal process within a person. Reconciliation has to do with the possible results of that internal process in the outer world. For reconciliation to take place, he says, trust has to be built up again. And trust is something that must be earned. Reconciliation has conditions attached to it, but forgiveness does not. What forgiveness does, at most, is to provide a place where trust can be earned and reconciliation made possible. So perhaps the best way to conclude is to go back to the beginning and remind ourselves of what the Buddha told us in the twin verses. Our life is shaped by our mind. We become what we think. Suffering follows an evil thought as the wheels of a cart follow the oxen that draw it. Our life is shaped by our mind. We become what we think. Joy follows a pure thought like a shadow that never leaves. She was angry with me. She attacked me. He defeated me. He robbed me. Those who dwell on such thoughts will never be freed from anger or hatred. She was angry with me. She attacked me. He defeated me. He robbed me. Those who do not dwell on such thoughts will become free from anger or hatred. For hatred or anger can never put an end to hatred or anger. Only love alone can. This is an unalterable law. People forget that their lives will end soon. For those who remember, quarrels come to an end. May it be so in our lives, in our community, in our families, and in our world.
If you enjoyed this video, please like us on YouTube, subscribe to our channel, and click on the bell to be notified whenever we post a new video.